Hello, I'm Janessa and welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to explore the full moon and lunar eclipse happening in Virgo on March 14th, 2025. We are going to look at eclipses overall, how to interpret them, what does it mean to be in eclipse season, what are eclipse series, how to interpret eclipses, and also dive into the details around the significations that are coming up with this particular full moon and lunar eclipse in Virgo. If you enjoy this kind of content, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. It is wonderful to connect with you, and let's dive into the analysis. Before we get into the specifics of the chart, let's start with just a general discussion about eclipses. As you know, every month we have a full moon and a new moon, but a few times a year we experience eclipses. Eclipses occur when the full moon or new moon are within a certain proximity to the nodes of the moon. We have the north node of the moon and the south node of the moon. Many different cultures across the world have had their own mythology and symbology around eclipses and their interpretation. You may have heard of the dragon analogy specifically, where the north node of the moon is considered the head of the dragon and the south node is considered the tail of the dragon. I talk about this a little bit in my video diving into the Khaleesi text message that Blake Lively sent Justin Baldoni. I'm trying to track and cover that story in depth, so if you're interested in that topic, you can check out that playlist as well. So what is an eclipse season? Eclipse season is usually referred to a time period where we have a couple eclipses in close proximity to one another. And this happens a couple times a year. For example, in March 2025, we have two eclipses. One is occurring on March 14th and the other is occurring on March 29th. This is considered the eclipse season. Later in the year, we will have another eclipse season where we have a couple eclipses back to back. During a specific eclipse season, we may have eclipses from the same eclipse series or different eclipse series. An eclipse series refers to a series of eclipses occurring within the same astrological axis, usually over the course of about 18 months. For example, during March 2025, we have two eclipse series that we're interacting with. The first is the Aries and Libra eclipse series, which was initiated in April 2023 and is actually concluding on March 29th of this month. Aries and Libra are directly opposite one another, and that's what we mean by an astrological axis. This month we also have an eclipse occurring from the Virgo Pisces eclipse series. And we'll talk a little bit more about that eclipse series in a moment. It's important to note that a new moon or full moon doesn't necessarily have to occur in the same sign that the nodes are located. For example, later this month on March 29th, we will have a new moon and solar eclipse in Aries, but the nodes of the moon will still be located in Pisces and Virgo. That's not the case for the full moon and lunar eclipse occurring on March 14th, because the sun is in Pisces and the moon will be in Virgo. So the sun and moon are going to align with the signs of the nodes of the moon. So how do we interpret eclipses? A basic interpretation is that an eclipse is some sort of disruption or departure from the norm. It can have a certain unpredictable quality where you don't know what direction it will head. Often I find that certain revelations can come to the surface because when we create an opening from the norm, from the status quo, we may discover new information. And depending on what's happening in the eclipse chart, we may have an idea ahead of time what kind of information we could encounter. Is it more emotional information, mental information, information that's coming from within us, or potentially information or some sort of revelation that's occurring in our situation around us? This will be very specific according to how this eclipse chart impacts and activates your astrological chart. Ultimately, eclipses deepen our connection between two polarized areas of life. In the case of this full moon and lunar eclipse in Virgo, we're talking about the Pisces area of life and the Virgo area of life. Usually, these two signs are considered opposites for a lot of reasons. For example, Virgo is ruled by Mercury. Mercury likes to be in the weeds or in the details of something, versus Pisces, which is ruled by Jupiter according to traditional astrology. And Jupiter is much more expansive, wanting to look at the bigger picture. So you can already see, just thinking about those two signs and their qualities, one being an earth sign, one being a water sign, how we start to see the tension between these polar opposites. This is really important to keep in mind when looking at your astrology chart, because Pisces and Virgo are going to be associated with specific houses in your chart. For example, if you're Pisces rising, Virgo is in your 7th house. So we have the 1st house and the 7th house axis. Yourself, but also people you're in partnership with. Often these are two separate experiences, although related. And we could say that an eclipse is going to connect those two areas of life in a much deeper way, potentially bringing up revelations or more information about a situation that you're involved in. How can we work with eclipse energy? This is where I have some opinions, and they may or may not be relevant depending again on how your chart is being activated. But generally speaking, I would say that eclipse season is a good time to question the assumptions and plans that you may have in place. Be open to disruptions that might actually create new opportunities or introduce new perspectives that you may not have encountered before. Avoid becoming too attached to particular ways of doing things or outcomes. This doesn't mean don't have boundaries or don't take action. Depending on how this activates your chart, this might actually be a great time to take action around certain things in your life. But proceed with caution and with respect, knowing that you are a piece of the puzzle. You are part of a fabric of connections and relationships that ultimately are much bigger than you and your singular experience. I think this is why sometimes we come across stories around eclipses where people in different cultures would actively try to hide from eclipses. They were wary of the shifts and the changes that could occur, but ultimately that coming from a place of respect. Because eclipses remind us that even when our lives have some sense of structure and order, we often are much closer to that edge of chaos than we tend to realize in our daily routines and lives. Sometimes the greatest opportunities emerge from that chaos or disruption. The way we interpret that is by slowing down and tuning in to our own inner intelligence and wisdom. As with any lunar event, check in with your body. Create the time and space for it to actually communicate with you in the subtle ways that our body sensations can guide us into a deeper level of experience. Let's talk now about this specific series of eclipses. The Virgo Pisces eclipse series was initiated in September of 2024. We had one eclipse on September 18th. And the final eclipse in this series won't come until 2027. That will be happening around February 20th of that year. The eclipse occurring on March 14th is only the second in this series. So I think it's important to keep in mind that in many ways we're in the beginning stages still of understanding what this eclipse series is revealing to us in the area of your chart associated with Pisces and Virgo. Often eclipses kick off a series of events that then take about 6 months to come to completion in some way. The September 18th, 2024 eclipse was in Pisces. So you can reflect on whether there were specific themes coming up around that time in that area of your life, in that area of your chart. And know that on March 14th, there's going to be something coming up in opposition to that, in the opposite area of life. With all that being said, let's get into the specific astrology chart for this full moon and lunar eclipse in Virgo. Here's the Virgo full moon eclipse chart. And I just realized that in the last segment of this video, my camera was slowly moving down. So apologies for that. But I'm going to include it because the content was good and I think I fixed it now, so it shouldn't do that anymore in this video. But let's dive into this chart. You'll see I have it set for March 14th in the early morning hours, and that's according to Boston, Massachusetts. Just so you know, if you are on the west coast of the US, this is actually occurring in the late hours of March 13th. You'll see in this chart, we have the sun at 23 degrees of Pisces, exactly opposite the moon at 23 degrees of Virgo. And the sun and the moon are quite close to the nodes. We have the north node at 27 degrees of Pisces and the south node at 27 degrees of Virgo. Saturn is also quite close to the sun at 22 degrees of Pisces. And of course, Neptune is still hanging out in the final degree of Pisces. We'll do a brief overview of this chart because there are really two things in particular that I want to call to your attention. The first is that Uranus is at 24 degrees of Taurus. This means that Uranus is forming a sextile with the sun and Saturn, and it's forming a trine with the moon. I have a video about Uranus that you can watch if you're curious about its significations and specifically some of the themes that come up in the sign of Taurus. But a quick summary is that Uranus can often bring in an element of the unexpected. Now, we already have that type of energy in many ways because this is an eclipse. But Uranus's influence is going to underscore that quality. things that we may not be able to anticipate, we can't necessarily plan for. It may also bring in an element of what is counterculture or against the status quo or the norm in some way. Uranus is the disruptor, it's the innovator, and sometimes it can be the rebel. So I would encourage you to look at not only where Virgo is in your chart and where Pisces is in your chart, but also where is Taurus in your chart. Notice if there are any things that come up around this eclipse and this full moon that are bringing in themes from the house associated with Taurus. For example, if we were looking at this chart and how it would impact an individual that's Capricorn rising, we would see that Pisces is in the 3rd house, Virgo is in the 9th house, and Taurus is in the 5th house. This means that the eclipse and this full moon are activating the 3rd house, which could be ways that this individual communicates, or maybe short distance travel, potentially themes around siblings. But it's also activating the 9th house, which can be connected to higher education or long distance travel, perhaps spirituality and philosophy. And Taurus is bringing in significations of the 5th house, which could be creative projects or even children. One example delineation is an individual who's maybe working on a children's book that would connect the 3rd house and the 5th house. And maybe something unexpected happens around this full moon that puts them in connection with someone at a publishing company, which would be signified by the 9th house. I share those examples just to make it very clear that this could be very specific, it could be very literal, it could also be figurative, but it will be quite personal to the individual and their chart and how it's being activated. The other point I want to highlight is that we have Venus already in retrograde in the sign of Aries, and Mercury is there as well, and it will station retrograde the following day on March 15th. My hypothesis is that this will closely tie in Aries as well to this lunar eclipse event. And this is because Venus rules Taurus, and we have Uranus in Taurus having a pretty prominent role in this event. We also have Mercury ruling Virgo, which is where the moon will be located. So you may want to also pay attention to the Aries part of your chart and the house significations there as you work on delineating for yourself what this full moon and lunar eclipse event may bring for you. I hope this analysis was helpful. We didn't have time today to dive into specific horoscopes for every sign, and I'm curious if that's something that you enjoy. I know I've included it with some of the full moon and new moon videos, and I haven't included it in others. So I would really appreciate it if you drop a comment below and let me know if that adds a lot to the value of this video, if you miss it when it's not included, or if you don't miss it at all. All in all, I really appreciate your feedback and you being here. I wish you the best with this full moon and lunar eclipse in Virgo. Let me know in the comments if you have any other questions about eclipses or what's happening in this eclipse season. And I look forward to connecting again soon.